Howdy folks, this is Justro at Metcalf Mills. Today I'm bringing you Story Time Tuesday. And today I want to tell you about an old feller I was raised around. If you remember the video about how I tie my boots, well, he's the one that learned me how to do that. And I want to talk about him today on Story Time Tuesday. His name was Bill Allen, and he was raised on Indian Creek in Yancey County, and he growed up with my grandpa and his brothers. They was close to the same age range. And they went to school together and played together, and I wish I could remember all the stories that I was told by them about when they was growing up in their childhood. The reason Bill tied his boots like he did, he only had one hand. His right hand was gone. He didn't have but about that much of a nub right there. And what happened was he was crossing a fence with a shotgun. He was hunting, and he had borrowed the shotgun from somebody else, and they didn't tell him that it would go off. And when he crossed that fence, that shotgun went off and blowed his hand off. And well, at least not when I knowed him, but he was getting pretty old when all the years that I knowed him, and he didn't let that hold him back none. He done everything, including tying his boots, and he done everything that anybody else could do. And he told me stories about, through his life when he'd be working, and he told me he cut a lot of pulpwood, and he told me a story about cutting pulpwood. He said there's another man on up the road working from where Bill was working, and that man used a horse to pull out his pulpwood out of the woods and load it on a truck, and Bill was carrying it out on his back, on his shoulders, And Bill said he could get out just as much wood in a day's time as that man got out with a horse. That's how hard he worked. And he swung an axe with his left arm, one-handed. And I remember all of his tools: his weed eater, his tiller, push mower. Every tool he used he had made him a leather loop hooked onto the tool like on his chainsaw, and he'd stick that nub through that loop, that leather piece of wide leather strap loop, and he'd use a chainsaw and whatever he needed to, and do just about as much work as anybody else could when he was old, when I knowed him. And I growed up around him all my life, and we went to the same church. Our families went to church together all the time and was good friends. And when you went into church, the first seat on the left right there against the wall, that's where he sat, and I'd always sit 2 seats down back there with him all the time. And I spent a lot of time around him, worked with him some, and he's just one of my favorite people growing up that I got to spend time around. And he told me a lot of stories about the olden days and all that. And one time I took him, he wanted to go back over in the Sodom, and that's over on Indian Creek where he growed up. It's a big old cove back in there, and he wanted to go over there to the ramp patch. And I took him over there, and I had my four-wheeler, and I rode my four-wheeler in, and he walked and carried his digging tool, and he wouldn't ride. He walked all the way in there, and we dug a bunch of ramps and spent most of the day in there, and then we come back out, and he walked every bit of the way. And he loved to get out in the mountains and look around at stuff and walk, and he growed a garden. He always had a big garden. And I think his tiller was tore up one time and he turned his whole garden with a shovel and one hand. And it was amazing how he worked, and he done a lot of mowing. They had a big place over there where they lived, and he kept everything mowed and weed-eated and took care of. And I remember he had a little old log, kind of a little old log cabin, maybe 10 by 10 or 12 by 12, and he cut the logs and he built that little old log cabin, and he had him a bed in there. When they had, once a year, they'd have a lot of people come and stay, and he'd go down there to his little log cabin, and that's where he'd stay. He had him a bed in there, and he liked it, having his own little space. And he's just real interesting, and I really enjoyed growing up around him, and I learned a lot from him. He was a real old timer. He growed up in the wagon days like my grandpa did, and he could tell you a lot of things about the olden days and how it was. And he's the one I got my Hickory King corn seed that I grow from. I hope you enjoyed hearing about old Bill. I don't do probably a good job talking about him and how much he meant to me. It don't do him justice, but he's one of them people that I will always be thankful that I got to spend a little time out of my life with. And I know y'all take time out of your life to watch my channel, and I appreciate that. I hope it helps you and blesses you, and I hope you get some enjoyment out of it. This is Just Roe at Metcalf Mills. I look forward to seeing you next time.